Thank you, Maitri, for the opportunity in this series, and thank you guys for being here today online and in the room. If you're on Twitter, I'm David P. Leonard, just like my name. Okay, so I'm David Leonard, Director of Events for the Walrus Foundation. I'm here to talk to you about this, talking. I must say it's actually a bit funny for me being at a microphone, since usually my job is to be backstage making other people get at microphones, but here we are. So quick show of hands, how many of you have public speaking as part of your daily work lives or daily lives? Yeah, all right, a pretty decent group. So me too. Here's where I come from, a bit of background. I began my career doing publicity and events for authors and publishers, big and small, so from the smallest poetry publishers to the biggest multinationals. This meant writing press releases, media pitches, booking interviews, setting up author events across the country. Over the course of 9.5 years as being a book publicist, I brought thousands of authors of all stripes to microphones across the country. For some of them, it was pretty familiar. You know, they're well-established writers. But for many, it was their first time in the public eye, could be their first book, and a lot's riding on this. The opportunity they have to get noticed, maybe sell a few books, was absolutely critical. So, you know, from young unknown novelists to massive international bestsellers, this was the goal. After that, I left and ran an environmental campaign for a forest conservation NGO. It was all about marketing relationships, storytelling, a little bit of events, but mostly not. And then 6 years ago, I joined the Walrus Foundation. The Walrus, if you don't know it, has been a magazine for 13 years. It's been run by a charitable foundation, so we are a nonprofit. When I started, we decided to begin an events program largely out of necessity. 2008 happened, and the credit crisis happened, and finances were difficult, and we thought, maybe events are a solution to this. So I'm the founding producer of what's now become the flagship series, which is called the Walrus Talks. There's 20 to 25 Walrus Talks a year across the country. As Elizabeth said, the format is quite stripped down. It's 8 speakers, 7 minutes each, on a theme. Over the course of the year, 20 to 25 talks, do the math, that's 160 to 200 speakers at a microphone like this a year across the country. From teenage performance poets to Margaret Atwood to astronauts, ambassadors, rappers, academics, trained performers, and just regular people with a great story. My job is to find the best speakers to present those ideas to intelligent Walrus audiences and to make sure those speakers are informed, comfortable, and confident enough to deliver the high standard of content that the audiences expect. The Walrus stands for high content, and it needs to be high-value content. It could be their first talk, it could be their fourth that week. My job is to get them there being good. Now, because we have that high standard, I work with lots of speakers who are comfortable on stage. We obviously book people who've already established themselves. But because we ask them for something unique, a 7-minute talk, it has the ability to sort of throw them off a bit. They have to create something fresh for us rather than rely on the keynote address they always have or the elevator pitch they're accustomed to saying. And the length is short enough at 7 minutes to require discipline, but it's long enough to require kind of careful planning. You can't dash off a 7-minute talk unless you want to get lost. So no matter how good you may be at doing anything new, having a little training is always helpful, and that's where I come in. So public speaking's played a huge role for me and the people I've been responsible for, as it does or will, I'm sure, for many of you, as we just saw from that show of hands, and that's why we're here together today. So 5 good ideas I use for myself, which I used for myself today, and 5 good ideas that I use to help Walrus talkers succeed on the stage. So the first idea, now I will say of these 5 ideas, you see them in front of you, 2 of them are quite tactical and 3 of them are fairly broad, so here we go. The first idea is simple, has many facets. Take the opportunity. It could be a media interview, a press conference, a presentation, a lecture, a speech at a wedding. I mean, anytime you need to get up in front of a microphone, the first thing you need to be sure about is what your host expects of you. How are you being represented? You know, how is my bio on this page in front of you? Is it accurate? Am I doing what they expect of me? Can I fulfill what's expected of this? Am I in fact someone who knows about public speaking? Am I at the wrong event? You know, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. And lots of people are asked, will you do this thing? And they say yes. And that's a good instinct, but it's only good instinct if you know what you're saying yes to. And that's the absolute first thing people need to consider. And you'd be surprised how few people do. You need to do the work in advance to understand what the opportunity could be for you and for your organization. The last thing you want to do is offer up what the audience isn't there to see. Audiences are easily turned off. I hope you're still with me. And the first thing to do it as a speaker who's off track or off message. Ask your host, read the ads, listen to the promotional things in the radio, read the program, do anything that's out there about this event, read all of it, read the briefing you get, follow the instructions of your organizer. They're there to help you. This is your opportunity to further your ideas. Don't miss it. When I'm booking a speaker for the Walrus Talks, and like I say, it's about 200 a year, and I'm working right now on, I'd say, probably 40 events concurrently, so I've got about, whatever that is, 400 speakers in play. I have to be very clear and disciplined in my own work about letting them know what I expect of them. I know I need to let them know how long they have, 7 minutes, what I expect them to do, forward-looking ideas about their subject area, and where they fit with the rest of the content. It's absolutely key to give people context for what they're doing. So if I walk into this series having no idea what this series is, or what this series has done, or who you all are, then I think I'm setting myself up to fail. The best speakers are the ones who come to me with questions, and they ask me lots of questions. And then we have a small team, but we work together with those speakers to create and tailor their talk to fit the composition and size of the audience. Small audience, big audience, nonprofit audience, corporate audience, it doesn't matter. And knowing who the audience is and what the audience expects to gain from your talk is absolutely critical. Use your hosts, ask about the audience, ask a lot of questions, research anyone who's appearing on stage with you. Now, when I say host, I'm using it broadly. This could be for, if it's a media interview, your host is the producer. If it's a wedding speech, your host is whoever asked you to speak at the wedding. If it's this, my hosts are the maitre. Your host has asked you to do a speech for a reason. Maybe your host is your executive director who's making you do a press conference. It's hard to say. But ask the host what they expect of you. Research anyone else who's appearing with you. Consider how the audience that you've done the research is going to respond to your content, and consider what your end goals as an individual or as an organization are. Do you want to inspire the audience, turn them into ambassadors? Are you actively fundraising? Is this about media coverage? Your end goal should inform what you say, as it should in all your work, but the makeup of the audience should inform how you say it. Delivering something off topic, off time, or off message is a missed opportunity for your audience to learn from you, but it's also a missed opportunity for you to connect with them. When I used to book author events as a publicist, I worked closely with a fairly I'm not going to use names here just because I feel like I can't use names, a very prominent nonfiction author. He was a very good speaker and smart enough to understand that he meant different things to different people. Every reader is an individual person who experiences a book in a different way. And he's nimble enough to be able to morph his presentation to suit whichever audience he was speaking in front of. So when he spoke at book clubs, he was warm and chatty and funny, and he focused on the human elements of his stories. He wore a sweater, he was very personable. But then when he spoke for a corporate audience, he was serious and direct, and he focused on the hard facts in his book. He drove a jacket, he really drove his points home, he was clear and direct. No matter where he spoke, he understood what the audience wanted from him, what they saw in him, and he tailored his talk. He didn't change what he had to say. I mean, it was still his talk, but he tailored his talk to suit the audience. In the end, he made both types of audiences happy, sold a lot of books, which was his end goal, and he got invited back. So how did he tailor that talk? It wasn't just the sweater, just as a hint, not just the sweater. His work, like your work, has many facets. But within that, there are connection points to different types of audiences, and he knew how to find them. Human stories for the book clubs, hard facts for the corporate types. These connection points exist with every audience. When you speak in a room like this, when you're on the radio, television, a press conference, there's connection points everywhere. And the key to that, well, that's the second idea. Build a bridge. Your work is likely broad and multi-directional. You spend all day doing it, all day, every day. You know this work really, really well. And it's easy to get caught up in the complexities of that work and to get lost in the details. We all do it. But think of your knowledge of your work as a castle. It's big, it's robust, it's well constructed. You've got a lot of space in your castle, lots of hallways you can guide people through once they're inside. The key to satisfying an audience, as we just talked about, is knowing which of those hallways to take them down. You understand who they are, you understand what they want. But guess what? What's often surrounding a castle? It's a moat. And no matter how well you think your work may be, or how well known you think your work may be, or how expert you think your audience is, there's always a gap, a moat, between what you know and what they know. No matter how expert they are, and it's important to remember that a lot of times in audiences, people are experts, and they might even be more expert than you. But the reason that you're on that stage, that you've been picked there, is because you have something that the host thinks you have to share with this group. But if you can't bring them into your castle, if you don't have a bridge, so you've got to build a bridge over that moat. And that bridge is made up of those connection points that my author could find with his book clubs and with his corporate speeches. And he was able to flip back and forth depending on what was needed. Now, a common misconception, I'm going to just blow this one out of the water, is that the bridge you need to build is done by dumbing down your content. Somehow taking your content and making it not as complex or exciting or as in-depth as it is. That's one way to do it, and some people certainly do it that way. But it doesn't serve you well, and it doesn't serve your audience well, and frankly, it doesn't serve your message well. The key is in showing people context, like you do for a speaker who's speaking at your event. You give them context. If you've done your audience research, and you know where they fit into your world, and you can get a sense of their familiarity with your topic, And the moat, then if the moat is wide, you have to give them something familiar that relates to your topic and leads them over it. In the resources, which are on that page in front of you, I've included a Q&A with Malcolm Gladwell about the tipping point, which I think everyone in the entire Earth has read by this point. The thing about Malcolm Gladwell is he's able to take a lot of pretty heady data sets and societal trends and abstract concepts and find a through line that connects them. He synthesizes these stories into very simple ideas that resonate. Now, a lot of people criticize him for oversimplifying, and that may be fair. I'm not going to get into that. But whether or not you're a fan, it's impossible not to admire how well he takes those complex sources and makes them real to people. People who would never dream of studying that kind of data, that kind of complex, statistical data, read and love his work, and they swear by his work. We had a Walrus talker once who's absolute, again, no names, an absolute world-leading scientist doing incredible work across a number of disciplines, very complex stuff. I saw an early version of her speaking notes and saw that though the people in her field would be totally on board, they completely get what she was up to, a general audience, no matter how smart they are, and our Walrus audiences are very smart, would likely be lost because she didn't give them an entry point. So if you lose your audience, everyone's got smartphones, everyone's looking for a distraction. If you lose your audience, you've lost your audience. It's hard to get them back. So she and I worked together to put her research into context that a general audience, rather than her academic audience, would understand. In the end, she gave her speech exactly as she had written it at first, except she added 20 or 30 seconds at the beginning, where she ran through how her field interacted with the daily world. Simple as that. She didn't dumb it down. She provided context and brought the audience up to her level. They loved her. She got to present her work to an educated, engaged audience who may not have otherwise seen it, and they learned a lot. Bridges are meant to connect things, to bring people to the same place, and she brought them to her. So if you're not sure how much your audience knows, or you don't see a natural bridge, here's a quick exercise, which is also a preview of something that we're going to do in the workshop portion of this event after I talk. You don't dumb it down, but can you reduce your content into its basic form? Can you describe the work you do in one sentence? In 2 sentences? Will that sentence or 2 resonate with an audience while also helping you achieve that goal? It's not dumbed down, it's simplified. Once you have that sentence, you can build around it. As example, when I talk about the Walrus Talks, it's a series of national events meant to create conversation on the issues that change Canada and the world. That's my sentence. If I have to do a 2-minute talk about the Walrus Talks, I can take that sentence and build 2 minutes around it. If I need to do an hour-long talk about the Walrus Talks, I can build an hour-long on top of that sentence. That's the absolute fundamental core of what I do, and that's the absolute fundamental core of what my message needs to be. So it's really not about dumbing down, it's about building blocks. And it's a good exercise for speaking, that exercise of one sentence, but it's also a good exercise, frankly, for all communications work. And I think anyone here who does any kind of communications work all day knows that being able to reduce what you do into one sentence is absolutely critical to help you understand it. So we've done our homework, we know what's expected of us, we've crossed the moat, and the audience is with us. Now the trick is keeping them. So let's talk a bit about storytelling. Now, storytelling, of course, working with novelists is an easy thing to talk about, but it's maybe a little less hard to talk about for some people's work who maybe is abstract, shall we say. People connect, so tell a story. That's our next point. People connect with stories. They want to hear about people, and they want to relate to people. Animals also, by the way, count as people in terms of the way people react. I think we all know this, that we instinctively react to people and animals and human stories, but there's science. Now, I'm not a brain scientist, but I'm going to do a little bit on brain science right now, so bear with me. There's been a bunch of studies over the past few decades that have shown the brain is wired to sort the physical and literal world to help you respond with appropriate emotions. So if you bite into something rotten, your brain sends a disgust emotion, and then you understand that now you're eating something rotten. There's something called the insular cortex that does this. But here's the fun part. The studies have also shown that the brain does not differentiate between literal biting into something rotten and reading or hearing a really good description of something rotten. Your brain still produces the same reaction. So the disgust emotion will come in. This is why when you're reading a great book or watching a great movie, you'll feel those deep emotions as if you were experiencing them yourself. Your brain, and this is something far back in our evolutionary history, has learned to synthesize, to put things into context that way, to sort of look for narrative. But of course, the important thing to remember is it's not just the disgust emotion that part of the brain controls. The insula controls many different types of emotional responses, including love and belief and joy. These are the things that connect us. Some say that the insula is the home of empathy, and this is the storyteller's secret weapon. Your brain seeks narrative, and your brain is seeking empathy. Every one of you right now is doing it. When you hear a story of a person, you're hardwired to translate their experiences through your own experiences. Your brain's trying to relate to their story. When you give a talk, use this. If you know who the audience is, you built a bridge, let them into the topic, then introduce them to something or someone who they can feel empathy for. A recent cover story of the Walrus magazine by our editor-in-chief, John Kay. It was the September issue, the one before the one you have on your tables or there. Take one on the way out. It was about the battle between Uber and the traditional taxi industry. He did a Walrus talk for me a few weeks ago around the same topic, using his story as a basis for that. That was on October 7th at the AGO. So as research for the article, he took the multi-day Toronto taxi course, I think it was 15 days, and he also watched the intense UberX driver initiation video, which was 15 minutes long, and then he became an Uber driver. And for this story, he was on the front lines driving for Uber. So the first-hand experience became the basis of the piece, and it also became the basis of his Walrus talk. It's easy when you think about Uber versus taxi to get caught up in conversations about regulation or like legal wrangling or government intervention or business practices or all this kind of stuff. And it's a real morass, and you can get weighed down in that stuff. And John knew that. So for his Walrus talk, he focused on two characters, two people. The first is, I see a few of you around here, downtown urbanites, on the go, your iPhone's in your hand, you're dashing from bar to restaurant, you're dashing to the club, you're dashing home again, you're just Uber the whole way. On the phone the whole way, this is how it goes. You love the fact that you can rate people, you love the fact that you don't have to deal with credit cards, it's very nice, it's very easy, it's very simple. As John told the story of this person, you could see people responding. He also told the story of the other side. It's an elderly person, perhaps with a disability. She's getting groceries, she's going to the doctor. She needs traditional taxis, and this is what she uses. She doesn't have a smartphone, she doesn't care, she doesn't want one. She's not on the go, she wants to use a credit card or maybe cash. The audience instantly recognized both these characters and instantly connected with John because of it. He described the benefits of Uber. He went on, he did a big rallying cry for Uber as it related to the younger character, and you could feel the crowd kind of coming along with him. It felt like, to be honest, by the end it felt like he was leading a rally for Uber, and by the end people were like, yes, Uber's the greatest. But then he changed, he pivoted. He described the older woman in the winter needing help getting in and out of a car, needing the extra care and the extra training that comes with that 15-day taxi course. And the audience, you felt the entire room shift, feeling empathy for this woman and feeling empathy for this story. And the kind of rah-rah Uber people started to feel a little sheepish, and they understood, oh, wait a second, this is more complicated than that. And they felt empathy because they've all slipped on ice, and they've all have a grandmother, and they all have had health problems, and they've all needed help from time to time in their life. And John got that, and he took them in the course of 7 minutes from being completely on one side to completely on the other side and understanding that there's serious questions to be asked. And he did it entirely through characters and entirely through story. He could never have gotten them there by talking about the taxi course or by legal wrangling or by talking about the power of Uber to do X, Y, or Z or the power of taxis. He did it through people and he did it through metaphor. And it's powerful stuff. Okay, you say, I know, now this is, I see some people who might say, my work doesn't have stories. It's not really story-based. My work is about stats, and the stats really tell the story of the work that I do. I'm a scientist, let's say, and it's really all about stats. I worked in the nonprofit sector for some time, and in books for a long time before that, which is effectively the nonprofit sector. And we're taught that funders especially want metrics. They want things that are measurable. They want things that are trackable. They love to be able to assess us. It's just easier to fund, easier to deal with, easier to measure against each other. So if you're turning a great cost-profit ratio or devoting a high percentage of your funding to the cause, or you have X% more critical habitat saved or X% fewer illnesses happening, this is a good thing for funders. These are stats that you want to use. And you can use these stats, but it's important to use them for funders because they like them. But it's also important to use them in audiences only if you're using them in concert with stories. Stats don't light up the insular cortex. They don't light up that disgust or joy or despair response. All they light up is the math side of your brain, which I don't know what it's called. So use your stats. Absolutely use your stats, but attach them to characters. So it's great to say that you've saved X% number of lives this year, but why not tell a story of one of those lives? And that's the kind of thing that's going to really connect with an audience. I used to work for Canopy, the environmental organization, and our mission was to protect the world's forests, species, and climate by working with large-scale paper consumers to move them onto more environmentally responsible paper. Full stop. Their mission since expanded, and it's very important, but when I say that out loud, it doesn't have a lot of emotional impact. No? No. Okay. We knew that. And anyone who's worked on any sort of major environmental issues, and I think anyone who's working on climate change feels this every single day, it's hard to make the concepts of the environmental issues real to people because they're giant and they're abstract and they're all-encompassing, but they're not necessarily felt in the moment. And so at Canopy, we did what a lot of environmental orgs do, is we used animals. So it's great to talk about hectares of the boreal forest that we were preserving, and we preserved a lot of them. But it was really when we started using caribou and bears and birds and talking about the way these species were struggling in these habitats that people started to connect with the work. And that was absolutely critical to kind of changing the face of this issue and kind of helping our organization move forward. People relate to these survival stories, people relate to these animals because the stories are familiar in some way. And knowing how the people relate and what they care about kind of helps you guide them through your speech or interview or press conference or wedding speech or whatever happens to be. Even if it's only a brief talk, sprinkle some story in and the audience will come along. Now that's some broader concepts. So there's two good ideas left, which are both a little more tactical. Some of you, I'm sure, are here because there's one thing that you think about whenever you think about public speaking, and that's anxiety. So let's talk a bit about that. So this is really about an antidote to anxiety. Be the expert, point 4. Now, how many of you would say you suffer from stage fright or pre-talk anxiety? It's okay. I do. It's fine. Yeah. Okay. Some of us. So do some of the best speakers in the world. I see them backstage. I see them manifesting their stress in a bunch of different ways. They pace the room, or they drink too much water, or they make weird notes, and they do all sorts of things. But for people who do a lot of speaking, they can iron out the worst of it. It adds a bit of nervous energy if it's channeled properly, and you kind of get a real kind of dynamic speaker if you can channel that in the right way. I was talking to someone about doing this talk a couple days ago, and she told me the story of something she had attended by an executive director of a fairly well-known Canadian nonprofit. She told the audience that she used to book other people to talk about her cause because she felt they'd do a better job on stage than she ever could. And yet, despite her own self-perception that she was a bad speaker, she found herself disappointed when they couldn't land the talk as well as she'd hoped that they could. She saw missed opportunities everywhere, and finally, because her passion for the cause was so strong, she realized that she'd have to swallow her fear and do it herself. And she said that once she realized that the best thing for her cause was for her to actually do the speech herself, her anxiety melted away. She turned the anxiety into passion and became a tremendous speaker as a result. Now, I know, we don't all necessarily, shall we suggest, have a passion so deep for our jobs that it melts fear. Maybe some of us do, I don't know. And we all certainly don't necessarily need to become all-star speakers on the speaking circuit. This could just be 1 gig or 2 gigs or whatever it happens to be. For some of us, it's about getting through a presentation, getting through that wedding speech, getting through an interview. And so what's the secret for the rest of us? People who don't do a lot of talks assume that anxiety is the worst element of public speaking. And they're right in a sense, but it's important to remember that the root cause of many people's anxiety is the fear of failure. And that's absolutely key to anxiety. But the good news I'm here to share with you today is that there's an antidote to that to failure, and that's preparation. So be the expert. You've been booked for a reason. Do the work. Prepare. Don't dash it off. That's absolutely key to this. Before your speaking engagement, make sure you learn your topic well. Take the time and do the work. It's incredible how much knowledge plays into confidence. It seems simple. It's absolutely simple. But so many people come to a stage half prepared, figuring it'll just work out. That's not how it works out. That's how anxiety is born. As you prep your speech, talk to your colleagues about it. Have them ask you questions about that you might get in an interview or a panel. Try segments of your talk on your friends or your family or the bus driver or your neighbor or whomever you happen to run into. Essentially workshop it. This is what stand-up comedians do. They workshop their material before they bring it to the stage. And then when they get to the stage, it's more polished. And then when you find the parts while you're workshopping this with your friends that are clear and direct and have emotional impact and really people respond to, and they feel true in a way to your mission and what you want to say, write them down. You might not want to do your whole talk verbatim from a page, or you might want to, but you definitely want to have a clear idea of what you want to say. And if your anxiety is really bad, maybe reading from a page is okay. Maybe having that guide to bring you through is fine. But before you get anywhere, you need to practice. You need to know what you need to say. You need to be ready to say it. You need to meet the time allowed. You need to hit the points expected of you. This goes back to the first point about knowing what your hosts are expecting from your talk. And the only way to do this is with practice. You can't just dash this stuff off. And you'll find the better you know your content and the more it feels natural, the less anxiety you'll feel. The best Walrus talks we ever have are the ones where the speaker seems effortlessly in command of the podium. In all cases, it's not because that speaker doesn't suffer from pre-talk anxiety or stage fright. It's because that speaker knows their topic and their material inside and out. And they've done the work up front. Expertise takes effort, and it shows when someone puts it in there. I'll talk a little bit about technology, because for some people it's another cause of anxiety. Now, this is obviously a single microphone, but in some talks there's all sorts of other things going on. Some of our Walrus talkers want to use slides and images while they talk. For some, the slides are absolutely critical to illustrate certain points. I always say to them, if you want to show me a village, pre and post hurricane or flood, absolutely, I want to see 2 pictures. If you want to show me a graph with lots of small words on it, I don't want to see that. For others, the slides become almost like a crutch. It's a way to help guide them through a talk, and that is a useful tool. If you have 6 points you want to hit, maybe you want to make 6 slides that illustrate each of those points. It's not a bad idea. But I always say to them early in the process that you should only use the technology beyond this microphone if it's going to make you better on stage. If it's not going to enhance what you're doing, don't do it. It's adding an unnecessary element that you don't need. But for some gigs, I did a panel last week where they insisted that we use a PowerPoint. You have to. So if you end up in a situation where you're expected to use a PowerPoint or a video file or some sort of wacky technology, the idea is just test it. Just test it and test it and test it and test it and test it. We live stream all of the Walrus talks, and so I spend a lot of time fussing with live streams in my other job, and it's just test it and test it and test it. As an organizer, what I can tell you, the earlier you talk to your host about what tech they have, what tech they expect, and what tech they demand, the better position you're going to be in. If you show up with a PowerPoint on a stick or a video on a stick 20 minutes before your talk, someone like me or someone like Maitri is losing their minds. So, and if they're losing their minds, that means that they're off their game, which means that their stuff might break. So what you're doing is you're taking a risk. And reducing anxiety for me is about reducing risk. So test your technology, know your topic, consult your peers, practice, practice, practice. This is the moment that you've been given. If you do the work and you are the expert, that's the antidote to anxiety. But of course, you want to be perceived as an expert before you even say words. So for my last good idea, I want to talk a little bit about physical comportment. Now, I'm not a speaker trainer in that sense necessarily. A lot of my speakers come to me, I wouldn't say fully formed, but mostly formed. But when you want to step in front of a microphone or camera, you need to own your speech, and that's the 5th good idea. You should be conscious of how you come across. The audience takes in your demeanor as much as they take in your words. Walk with purpose. Think about your posture. Think about your breathing. You want the audience, whether it's one person or whether it's an entire stadium, to have confidence in you and what you're saying. Imagine every good performance you've ever seen. Every rock show or every theater performance or every whatever it happens to be, the performers make an entrance. Now, I'm not saying you need to come down on a harness or like burst through a screen or like have things exploding, but how you carry yourself on stage absolutely matters because people take visual cues, and this is part of the insular cortex looking for narrative in everything you see. So if you see someone sort of shambling up to a podium, looking stressed and wringing his or her hands and sweating, then that's a clear sign that that person maybe isn't as much of an expert as you thought they might be. So if you're too nervous, I don't know, there's probably some people in here who do yoga, I'm sure. There's a breathing technique called Samavriti, which is very, very simple. And you breathe in for 4 seconds, and you breathe out for 4 seconds. And you repeat it as necessary. And if you do that, I'm not going to make you do it unless you want to. What you'll notice is that your heart rate slows down, and the tension leaves your chest and your stomach, and the tension leaves your back. And the key to that is not coming up to a podium like this, feeling really tense. And then once you get to the microphone, and this is actually, I will confess, sort of weird talking about this while I'm at a microphone. So you've got good posture, do I guess, and the confidence that comes from knowing your material and having practiced, you begin the talk. There's some absolute basic things to consider when it comes to how you speak and how you look and how you come across. In the resources on that page there, there's a pretty large list of tips from Toastmasters, which is an org that trains speakers. I'm not Toastmasters, so I'm not going to go through that whole list, but there's 90 tips on that link that I put in there, which is everything from soup to nuts, as they say. And it's really a great list. It should be helpful to you. But as a quick guide while I stand here in front of you, what I always tell people and what I work with myself is just go from head to toe and think about head to toe. While you're here, think about head to toe. Before you get on, think about head to toe, but when you envision your speech. So keep your head up from your notes as much as possible. It makes your voice carry more. It helps correct the posture as well. If your head's up, your shoulders are up. If you're at a podium, make sure to look at each side of the room. You notice I've been looking at all of you today. And if you're on television, With a single camera, you obviously want to look into the camera, but if you're being interviewed on television, do not look into the camera, look at your interviewer, otherwise it looks super weird. And as a television viewer, when someone turns to the camera, it feels really disconcerting, so don't do that. It's not a thing you want to do. Enunciate. You need to speak clearly and confidently. Don't be afraid of the microphone. It's there to help. For some people, if you haven't done a lot of speaking and you're in a big room, the microphone and the amplified voice can be sort of disconcerting, but don't let it be. Speak in a normal voice, let the microphone do the work. You can sort of forget that it's here other than just being aware of where your head is and isn't. Speak at a normal rate. People get nervous and they either speed up their talks or they slow down a lot to try and overcompensate. Keep a timer with you. I've got one right here. And as a tip to see how you're doing, if you've practiced at home and you've made notes, which I have here, add timing cues. If you have a 5-minute speech and you've got a certain number of paragraphs, make a note of where, when you practice, the 1-minute point is in the paragraph. And if you hit that point and your timer's at 1.5 minutes, well, then you're probably going too slowly, so speed up. You know where you need to be, that way you can speed up or slow down accordingly. Moving down, shoulders should be relaxed, but obviously you don't want to slouch. The body's a letter T. We store a lot of tension in the shoulders and a lot of tension in our backs. And when you tense up your shoulders, you tense up your neck. When you tense up your neck, you're tensing up your voice. And everything starts to get a little crunched. The more relaxed you are up here, the more of a T you are, the stronger your voice is, the more you can carry. Some talks you'll do, you won't have a microphone, and you'll have to carry your voice. And if you're hunched over and nervous, it's just not going to work. Do you talk with your hands? I do a little, as you've seen. That's okay, in moderation. Audiences like that, a little bit of flourish is nice. A dynamic speaker is a good speaker. Obviously, someone standing here in one space for half an hour is a little much. But if your hands are moving around because you're nervous, if you're wringing your hands, or some people rub their hands together, you see people doing this or fidgeting with things, people notice, and people read it as being nervous, and people read it as having anxiety, and people read that as being not an expert in your topic, which is the last thing you want. And if you're a podium banger, that's fine, but it conveys anger. So that can work. That's a good thing if you want to convey anger. If you don't want to convey anger, just really don't do a lot of this, because even if it's just nervous, it seems like you're angry. If you don't talk with your hands, the two things you don't want to do is this, just sort of like slack at the sides, or the death grip. You don't want the death grip. You see a lot of people grabbing this podium like this. It's a hot spot for nerves. You grab this, and where does the tension go? Up your arms, into your shoulders, into your neck, into your voice. Don't do the death grip. If you're sitting, if you're in an interview on television or radio, your hands can be in your lap. Don't wave them around too much. If you're standing, moving down, be conscious of your hips. Now you're all looking, which is weird. You might be behind a podium or a curtain, but you really should stand straight onto the microphone. And this is something that people do nervously, is they sort of will stand kind of like, I don't know if you can't see me, you sort of stand at an angle like this. Just sort of, and a lot of you have probably done this, I've done this, and what happens with this is you end up pulling yourself off the microphone, and you can feel me doing it right here, and I'm sort of twisting, and all of a sudden I'm off the microphone, and the live stream can't hear me, and the people in the back of the room can't hear me, and you're sort of throwing them off, and also I've got my back to you, which is not what you want to do. So if you're standing and not walking, the other thing to remember is to keep your feet still. A lot of people do a lot of sort of kicking around with their feet. It's a nervous tick. Again, people notice it, and it makes you look like you're a horse, which is not a good thing. So really focus again on the letter T. Your body is straight from your heels to the back of your head. Straight up with posture, your shoulders are square, your hips are square, you're solid, you're not moving around too much, but you don't seem like you're this weird, tense robot. So with all these mannerisms in place or in check, depending on what they are, you can project control and you can project authority. And then really it's up to delivery. Delivery is an absolute personal thing. Everyone's got their own style. It's your stage, it's your style. You can add a little humor if you like, you can be casual, you can be very rigid, you can add dramatic pauses, you can do all sorts of things on a microphone. It's really your stage to control. And that's where, if you've done your work with knowing who the audience is, you'll know the kind of speech they want. My author was very personable and warm at book clubs, and he was very clear and direct and serious at corporate events. And there's a reason for that, because he understood that he had these different ways he could be. Don't be afraid to be funny if the time is right. And when you're practicing your talk with your friends and workshopping your talk, you'll see the moments where you can add a little something. And maybe it's a place where you're comfortable, or maybe it's a place where it lends itself naturally. The best speakers see a speech as a performance. This is your performance, and you need to own it. So that's the 5 good ideas. Take the opportunity, build a bridge, tell a story, be the expert, and own it. And then you can take the moment that's been given to you. You can use public speaking engagement as a tool to achieve your goals. Thanks very much.